You know, even though we've been talking about lying, I think I'm going to tell you a story that's true and only sounds tall. And I want to say here, I did not come to the Northeast to brag, but I have been on the cover of Modern Maturity magazine. Now, it's not called that anymore. Now it's called ARP, which always makes me think of a dog with a speech impediment. ARP, 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 ARP. But back in the summer of 1996, it was still called Modern Maturity, and when I went out to the mailbox and I pulled out my copy, opened it up, there I was, on the cover, in my cartoon form. You see, the cover story for that issue was what I did on my summer vacation. But the editors of Modern Maturity had gone out and gotten a lot of famous people to write that essay. And they had chosen for the cover art an old 1940s postcard, cartoon postcard. It was a vacation scene. It was a mother and a daddy and a child in arms and a little girl. That was me. And I knew who drew that cartoon. His name was Larry Smith. And it got me to thinking about what we used to do on our summer vacations. I grew up in Brownfield, Texas, and it got really hot in the summers, and so for about 2 weeks every summer, we would go to Ruidoso, New Mexico. They're in southern New Mexico to cool off a little bit. And I grew up an only child. Actually, my sister did too, but that's another story. And I was not only my parents' only child, I was the only child in their whole circle of friends. 4 or 5 couples of whom would go to Ruidoso every year the same time we did. So that meant that I was either spoiled rotten or I was bribed away from adult conversations with nickels to play the slot machines in the bars we frequented. That's right, I did say bars because that's about all there was to do in Ruidoso back in those days. It was just a little sleepy mountain town. We would rent a log cabin, truly rustic log cabin. We had a wood-burning cook stove. We had a real ice box that the delivery man brought a block of ice to a couple of times a week, keep things cool, and we had a little path down to the 2-hole privy. I'm talking rustic here. So everybody went into town, and the only place there was to go in town was the bar. And I'm saying here that the grown-ups didn't go to the bar to drink and get drunk because they were all a bunch of Baptists, Methodists, you know the type. They just wanted a place where they could go and sit around a table and visit and stand around one of those old upright pianos and sing the old songs. Now, I, on occasion, would have a Tom Collins. Always put up to it by one of those grown-ups. I would shinny up on the bar stool, look the bartender right in the eye, and I'd say, "I'd like to have a Tom Collins, please." And with a great big wink over in the general direction of the grown-ups, he would set one of those truly tall and frosted glasses up on the bar, fill it with ice and lemonade, and he'd put a maraschino cherry right on top. And I thought that was the best stuff I had ever drunk in my life. Well, then I might go play the slots for a while because by this time I had a pocket full of nickels. And every little bar back in those days had a little bank of slot machines right by the door. So I would drag me a chair over and get up on the chair and start feeding my nickels in the nickel slot machine, pulling down on that handle. Now, you don't have to do that anymore. They're all electronic. But back then, you had to pull down on a handle. And every now and again, 3 of the same kinds of fruit would come up straight across. And the nickels would just come pouring out of that machine. I'd have to put me a paper cup in under there to catch them all. Other times, of course, I wouldn't get anything back, and all I'd have to show at the end of the day would just be the black on my hand from pulling down on what we called the one-armed bandit. Well, the mint bar was one of our particular favorites. And this cartoonist I was talking about earlier, Larry Smith, he had a little studio right around the corner from that mint bar, and so he would come in there from time to time, and he and I got to be really good friends. He would buy me ice cream and candy, and so I liked him a lot. And I was absolutely fascinated by what this man did for a living. So I would ask permission from time to time to go around the corner where his studio was and watch him work. Well, now that studio was so small that there was barely room enough in it for him and his drafting table and his stool. So I would stand outside on the boardwalk with my nose pressed up against the screen door, and we would visit. Now, he already drew himself in his cartoons. He was a tall, lean, lanky fella, had a shock of blonde hair fell over his forehead. He looked a little like Joe Palooka. And before that summer was over, he started drawing me in his cartoons. Now, he would always draw me in a polka-dotted dress, red if he colored it, and with a Dutch boy bobbed haircut, because that's all my mother could do with my fine, straight hair, and he'd put a polka-dotted bow up on top of my head. Well, at the end of that summer, we went home, back to Brownfield, and Larry Smith got drafted because these were the closing years of World War II. But we still heard from him. He was still drawing the cartoons, only now he was making fun of Army life. And I still remember one of the postcards I got from him. He was in his Army uniform, and he still had that shock of blonde hair falling over his forehead. And in this particular postcard, he was leaning on a shovel. And underneath, he had lettered in the caption, "I'm an Army pilot now. I pilot here, I pilot there." And even though I was young, I don't even think I'd started to school yet. I might have been 5, might have been 6. I got it. And he would write me a note on the back and sometimes draw a caricature of Hirohito or Mussolini or somebody. And I still have all those postcards. Well, then we didn't hear from Larry Smith. And one day, we were back in Brownfield. My mother was sitting on the couch reading the paper, and I was playing in the floor. And all of a sudden, my mother just hollered. Well, I ran over to see what it was she was hollering about. And she was just pointing to the newspaper. Well, I looked down to see what it was she was pointing to, and there I was, in my polka-dotted dress, my polka-dotted bow up on top of my Dutch boy bobbed hair, in Ripley's Believe It or Not. And my mother read to me what it said out beside the picture. It said, "Donna Sue Christopher of Brownfield, Texas will not eat ice cream or candy, only spinach." Well, then we did get a letter from Larry Smith. Actually, it was one of those tourist maps on which he had drawn cartoons for all the places that people were supposed to go see. And on the back, there was a place for comments, and he had written in, "How about hiring me to answer your fan mail?" And you know, I have thought a lot about those events in the years since, because actually, I did get a letter. I got a letter from, I used to say it was Del Monte, but I have since found the letter, and it was from some obscure produce company in the Midwest, wanting to know if that entry in Ripley's Believe It or Not was true. The implication being that if it was true, they would like for me to endorse their spinach. And that's when I learned that other lesson about honesty and integrity, not compromising yourself for money, because my mother said no, it wasn't true. And you know, I think I've already had my 15 minutes of fame, and that was it. And it was a lie. And I think about that letter sometimes too, especially when I see these celebrities, sports heroes mostly, who advertise and endorse pantyhose they've never worn, soda pop they never drink, cereal they never eat, and I figure they just can't help it, because they didn't have the benefit of my upbringing in those bars in Ruidoso, New Mexico.